Shobha ma'am. Welcome to the Shriram Millennium School, Faridabad.
Good morning.
It is truly a pleasure to have you here today. My name is Shri, and we had some questions planned for you today.
Okay.
And with your permission, shall we begin?
Absolutely, I'm all ready for you, and I've got a nice hot cup of coffee as well.
So the first question that I had for you today is, who were your role models or sources of inspirations when you were a student?
When I was a student, or when I was a child, well, I guess I was a child as a student. You know, role models were around me all the time. Sometimes you were inspired by the books you read. Very often you were inspired by the people you spent time with. I was inspired by my own siblings. My brother was an incredibly prolific reader and writer. My father was an incredibly gracious, true feminist of that generation. My mother was a very ambitious woman who always felt that we could do better. My sister was a mischievous little, she's about less than 2 years younger than me, but she was, you know, full of spark and spunk and asking everybody questions. So, you know, there was inspiration all around you. Role models, I don't know, because, you know, in the sense, of course, you know, we all looked up to Nehruji's picture and what we'd read about him in history and that kind of thing. But role models were essentially people who lived decent lives and who were able to inspire the people around them. So, I mean, I can't really call out a particular person. Yeah, sure.
You also mentioned that you were inspired by the books you read.
Absolutely.
So our school is a great advocate for books and reading, and
That's
every
wonderful.
single student in our school, I'm sure, has a book that they absolutely love reading. My question for you is, what is a book that you absolutely loved to read as a child, and did it in some way inspire or shape the way that you are a writer today?
I think, you know, I'm going to answer the second part of the question first. I think in some ways what shaped my interest in writing was the fact that I was a voracious reader, and it was sort of a lazy person's response, but I even studied literature because I love to read, so I thought it's sort of an easy step to follow. In terms of, you know, you said, were they books that particularly inspired me? I feel like at every stage, the books were my favorite. So when I was reading naughty books as a little kid, you know, 3, 4 years old, those were exciting because of the variety of the, you know, we were not thinking in terms of political correctness that day, you know, in those days about gollywogs and things like that. We were thinking in terms of the adventure of the story, and I was always in admiration of the fact that people could come up with these kind of ideas. When it came to beyond that, I was very much interested, like all children, in the whole, you know, mystery section. So we read a lot of Enid Blyton's, you know, what is it, Famous Five, I'm even forgetting the names now, the adventure series with the 7, and then we had Mallory Towers. There was a brief period when I wanted to go to a boarding school, little knowing, even though I never really knew what a boarding school was, the idea of tuck and treacle and all of that, we had never even been exposed to snow or any of those things, but, you know, through the books, you discovered a whole new world. So each stage, different books were my favorite books. I remember reading the Thomas Hardy series. Some of it was, you know, class assignments, and some of it was to read beyond, because there was a teenage stage in life where I love tragedies, and the idea of, you know, the angst-ridden, you know, character, or the problems that could happen, you know, the letters left for the man and then it slips under the table and it's never found, and so, you know, all these unfortunate circumstances. So I don't know if that's common of all teenagers, but I definitely went through that stage, and, you know, Hardy was my favorite. Then I was a huge fan of the romantic poets, so I was very much into Keats and Shelley and, you know, all of that, yeah, Byron and Wordsworth, and, you know, we just loved it all. I spent many summers reading different, you know, books from different areas. So I definitely remember a summer when we had a long break when I read Russian literature. So then I was reading all the classics and the masterpieces. And at that point, you know, it was this whole new world. I did read some Japanese stuff. I read Indian classics. So different stages, there are different books that inspired me. I can't really call out one favorite. Today, if you ask me what's a good book, I would say, you know, the one I just read that I thoroughly enjoyed, because I'm quite judicious about what I read, since I have so little time sometimes. I'm always reading, but, you know, I have to select the books I want to read. I'm not always reading just for entertainment. I do read either to sort of learn something about a particular area, a non-fiction, you know, subject, or because I particularly like the style of an author's prose, or because it's been critically acclaimed by many, many people that I admire, so I feel I have to read that book. So it's, sometimes those are the reasons. But I always tell children, and it's a book I've said many, many times, was Gerald Durrell's My Family and Other Animals. If you haven't read it, it's a delightful book. I read it, I think, in class 8 maybe, or class 9. And I still remember that book in many ways because it introduced us to Corfu, to humor, and to a lot of big words. The teachers then used to tell us that if there are words in this book that you don't know, you've got to write it down, learn how to spell it, and know the meaning. And at the end of the week, we would get quizzed on it. So I still remember that the one word that I learned, I learned galvanized, but there's pusillanimous is definitely, I know, from that book because I hadn't encountered it before. And today, of course, we can use it all the time. But in those days, when I was in class 8, it was like a new word I learned. And so I remembered the book because of, the new things it taught me. So those are the reasons. Thank you.
Think about your teachers saying to write down the new words. Our vice principal here, she's behind the camera. She's always telling us about new words. Every single time we come across, she always has a new word for us.
And in the act of writing it down, sort of memorizing the spelling and the meaning, it becomes part of our everyday use, And that's part of, as a children's writer, I take my job pretty seriously, as you can tell. You have a responsibility to sort of inculcate those kind of habits in kids. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also had another question for you. I think you'd agree that there are certain moments in life that help us and form the person that we become.
Absolutely.
So what was a moment in your life that helped you grow as a writer?
That helped me grow as a writer? That's a very good question, and I need to think about it. I was going to say I remember exactly how I grew as a speaker, and that was when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And this is a true story that I haven't shared. I was the quiet one in the three of us. And I had an epiphany when I was 10 or 11 that very often you're sort of ignored if you don't learn to articulate your thoughts. And writing, of course, is one way of articulating your thoughts. But I remember because, my brother was the star right from a childhood, and my sister was a very chatty child. So very often I was thought of as the sort of disciplined, responsible, quiet, and those days, looked like my mother, they said good looking or whatever, all these phrases or descriptions that really left me feeling, and I was a very good student and all of that, and I thought, why do people only think of me as these things and not as an academic star or a good student? And I realized it's because I never say anything. I'm always listening to other people and not speaking. So it was like the floodgates opened. It was an epiphany. And I learned I can't say I learned to speak, but I started talking. And sometimes my, husband and others will tease me and say, and now you can't keep quiet, which is true. But unfortunately, that is the nature of life. If we have a lot of ideas, it's very important to pay attention to other people's thoughts. But if we're not able to formulate our ideas, it doesn't work. And there's a little story that I've already shared, and Shweta would have heard it many times at school. I just heard it last week from a little child on a meme or a TikTok video or something. And I'm going to tell that story to the children because it's an incredible story about communication. So when you say what made me a better writer, I think it's just practice. I really do believe practice makes perfect. I wrote as a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old, because I grew up at an era when reading and writing was our primary form of entertainment. We did a lot of composition. We did a lot of, even as games, we were always reading and writing. We were going to the library, bringing new books, taking it back. That was our fun. And we were always using our words for entertainment. So even playing games with my sister or others, we used to play games where we used to use words, big word, make little words, set the timer, that kind of thing. All of those habits, writing. My father sent off one of my stories to I always forget if it's Hindu or Hindustan Times, but it has a junior section and the Sunday paper. And he sent off some story I'd written about rabbits. It got put into the newspaper. I saw my byline. That is an impetus for wanting to write again, correct? So, those are all things that inspire you to write. And then how do you become a better writer? You keep writing. There you are.
Absolutely, ma'am. Now, the next question I have is a problem faced by many students. And so the thing is, of course, it's extremely important to balance our studies as well as our passions. But how can a student effectively balance both of them? Because sometimes when we are trying to pursue our academic goals, our passions are left behind. So in such case, how can we maintain this balance?
That's a very good question. I would like to say that you should be able to integrate your passion with your work. So, just like they talk about poetry of the school, classroom, poetry of the play yard or the playground, it's equally important that you bring in. So, for instance, if words are what appeal to you, you study your school books with that aspect of your passion of words in play. So, even if it means that the teachers are only assigning rather specific curriculum-oriented specifics, you can sort of work beyond it. You can extrapolate, you can use it further, you can discover more. Now, depends on what your passions are. If, for instance, you're a sports person and you're really interested in sport, you could integrate, when you have to write a class assignment on some subject, you could talk about your knowledge of that particular sport. So, I would genuinely say that try to integrate both. I also think, be an advocate in school for the fact that, we should all, I think today the schools, especially in India, what I've seen, and even in other parts, they do give a lot of emphasis for extracurricular activities. So hopefully you are able to integrate those. And, passion, as Maya Angelou, and I'm misquoting her because I don't remember the exact quote, but she talks about the fact that creativity is something that's ongoing. Like our Indian mythology about the Akshay Patra, the more you use it, the more it surfaces. So if you are passionate about something, put it into whatever else it is that you do. I think it's fine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the answer, ma'am. I'm sure it will help a lot of students. The final question that I had for you today is, we have 3 of your books here. One book that actually caught my attention was The Prince with the Paintbrush, which is about Raja Ravi Verma.
Yes.
My last question for you today is, what inspired you to write this book?
I'll tell you what inspired me. I was running into children who, even in India, would be able to recognize Mona Lisa and tell you who the artist is, or they would know who Van Gogh is, or they would know other things because their father had a picture of Starry, Starry Night in the office, or their mother had it in their home, and everybody seemed to know it. But, Raja Ravi Verma was one of India's ambassadors at a time when there was no travel. And that's because his art went to Vienna, his art went to Chicago. He was so well known for that. And he's the first to use oil paints after the East India Company style of artists. So, he really discovered people at that time were using pigments and art and things like that. He's in some ways our first modern Indian artist. And I thought, here is an artist nobody knows anything about. And if I want to write children's books, I should share his story with children. Then, of course, and I will talk about this book with the students, so we don't need to answer that now. But the reason I wrote it is because his art is in the public domain, which means we don't need permission to put it into a book. And I wanted children to read this book and be able to recognize or Galaxy of Musicians the same way they recognize Mona Lisa. So that is the reason why I wrote this book.
Thank you so much for the answer.
You're very welcome. And those are very incisive and stimulating questions for me. Thank you so much.